The boy's hands moved in steady circles across the leather, working the polish deep into every crease and scuff mark. 12 years old, maybe 13, with dirt under his fingernails and a concentration that belonged to someone much older. He sat cross-legged in the dust outside Maddox's general store, a wooden box of supplies beside him containing brushes, rags, and 3 different tins of boot polish. The morning sun caught the shine he'd already worked into a pair of work boots, making them gleam like they'd never seen a day of honest labor. Thomas Henley watched from across the street, coffee growing cold in his hands. The boy had been there since dawn, same as yesterday, same as the day before. Nobody in town seemed to know where he'd come from or where he slept at night. He just appeared each morning with his box in his steady hands, offering to clean boots for 50 cents a pair. Thomas crossed the dusty street, his own boots crunching on the gravel. The boy didn't look up from his work until Thomas's shadow fell across the leather he was polishing. "Morning," Thomas said. The boy raised his head. His eyes were the color of winter sky, pale and sharp. He studied Thomas's face for exactly 3 seconds, then smiled. "Good morning." "Captain." The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. He stepped backward, nearly stumbling over a loose board on the store's front porch. His coffee cup slipped from his fingers and shattered on the weathered planks. "What did you say?" "I said good morning, Captain." The boy's voice was steady, matter-of-fact. He didn't blink. Thomas's heart hammered against his ribs. "I'm not a captain." "No, sir, not anymore." The boy set down his polishing rag and looked directly into Thomas's eyes. "But you were." "Who told you that?" "Nobody told me nothing." Thomas glanced around the empty street, then back at the boy. "What's your name?" "Depends who's asking." "I'm asking." The boy picked up his rag again and resumed his circular motions on the boot. "You can call me whatever you want, Captain. Names don't matter much." "Stop calling me that." "Why?" "Because I never told anyone in this town about my service." The boy paused his polishing. "Maybe you didn't have to tell them." Thomas felt something cold crawl up his spine. What's that supposed to mean? Some things show, even when folks try to hide them. "I'm not hiding anything." "No, sir." The boy's smile was knowing, ancient. "Course not." Thomas studied the child's face, searching for some explanation. The boy couldn't be local. Thomas had lived in this town for 8 years, and he knew every family, every child. This one was a stranger, but strangers didn't know things they had no way of knowing. "Where are you from?" "Here and there." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I got." Thomas crouched down to the boy's level. "Listen to me. I need you to tell me how you know about my military service." The boy met his gaze without flinching. "I know lots of things, Captain. I know you drink your coffee black because sugar reminds you of MREs. I know you still check the locks on your doors twice every night. I know you keep your curtains drawn because you don't like folks looking in." "How could you possibly know that?" "Same way I know you've got scars on your back that you tell people came from a farming accident." Thomas's blood turned to ice water. He'd never removed his shirt in public, never spoken about those scars to anyone. They were souvenirs from a war he'd spent 8 years trying to forget. "Who sent you here?" "Nobody sent me nowhere." "Then why are you here?" The boy held up the boot he'd been polishing. The leather gleamed like black glass. "To clean boots, mostly." "Cut the act, kid." "What do you want?" "Want?" The boy tilted his head like he was considering the question for the first time. "I don't want nothing from you, Captain, but I think maybe you want something from me." "Such as?" "To know if it's true." "If what's true?" The boy set the boot down carefully beside its mate. "If you're still carrying them." Thomas felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. Carrying what? The ones who didn't make it home. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Thomas's hands began to shake. He tried to speak, tried to form words, but his throat had closed up tight. The boy reached into his wooden box and pulled out a different tin of polish. "These boots look like they've seen some miles, Captain. Mind if I clean them up for you?" Thomas looked down at his own feet, at the scuffed work boots he'd been wearing for 3 years. They were practical, unremarkable, the kind of boots that belonged to a man who fixed tractors and mended fences and tried very hard to be invisible. 50 cents, the boy said quietly. Same as everybody else. Thomas's wallet was in his back pocket, but he couldn't make his hands move to reach for it. He couldn't do anything except stare at this child who somehow knew things that were impossible to know. "What are you?" he whispered. The boy smiled again, and this time there was something almost gentle in his expression. "I'm just a boy who cleans boots, Captain. Nothing more, nothing less." But his eyes said different. His eyes said he was something else entirely, something that had been waiting for Thomas to walk across that dusty street and cast a shadow on the work he was doing, something that had been waiting for a very long time. Thomas found his voice first. "I asked you a question." The boy reached for a fresh rag from his wooden box. "You asked me lots of questions, Captain." "Stop calling me that." "What should I call you then?" "Thomas. My name is Thomas." "Nice to meet you, Thomas." The boy held out his hand like they were being introduced at a church social. "Boots still need cleaning, though." Thomas ignored the offered handshake. "How do you know about my service?" "Same way I know lots of things." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." Thomas felt heat rising in his chest. "Listen here, boy. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but it stops now." The boy looked up from his work. "Ain't playing no games." "Then explain to me how a kid your age knows details about my military service that I've never told anyone." "Maybe you told someone and forgot." "I didn't forget. People forget all kinds of things, Captain. Thomas, I mean. Not this. Never this." The boy shrugged and went back to polishing the boot in his lap. "If you say so." Thomas stepped closer. "I want answers. Real ones. Want doesn't get." "What?" "My grandmother used to say that. Want doesn't get, but need does." "Fine. I need answers." The boy smiled. "No, sir. You don't need answers. You need something else entirely." Before Thomas could respond, the screen door of Maddox's general store creaked open. Clara Maddox stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on a flour-stained apron. She was a woman built for hard work, with graying hair pulled back tight and eyes that missed nothing. "Everything all right out here?" Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd been settling disputes since before Thomas was born. "Just talking," the boy said without looking up. Clara's gaze shifted to Thomas. "Morning, Thomas. You bothering my nephew." Thomas felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Your nephew?" "That's right. This here's my sister's boy, visiting from up north." Thomas studied the boy's hands as he worked. The calluses were thick, built up over years of manual labor, the kind that came from handling rope and tools and machinery day after day, season after season. Not the soft hands of a child who'd spent a few months doing odd jobs. "What part of up north?" Thomas asked. Clara's jaw tightened. "Near the state line." "Which state line?" "The northern one." Thomas looked at the boy. "That right? You from up north." The boy kept polishing. "I'm from wherever Clara says I'm from." "Hear that? He's a good boy. Doesn't contradict his elders." Thomas crouched down again, studying the boy's face. "How long you been visiting, son?" "Long enough." "That's not what I asked." Clara stepped off the porch. "He got here about 3 months ago. Been helping me around the store ever since." Thomas examined the boy's hands more carefully. The calluses told a different story. They were old, deep, the kind that took years to develop. The boy's fingernails were clean now, but Thomas could see the permanent staining around the cuticles that came from working with machinery and chemicals. 3 months, Thomas repeated. "That's right." Thomas stood up slowly. "Clara, can I have a word with you, privately?" "Anything you got to say, you can say in front of the boy." "I'd prefer not to." The boy looked up from his work. "It's all right, Clara. I don't mind." Clara hesitated, then nodded toward the side of the building. Thomas followed her around the corner, out of the boy's earshot. "What's this about, Thomas? That boy is not your nephew." Clara's face hardened. "Excuse me." "His hands. Look at his hands next time. Those are working man's hands, Clara." "Years of working man's hands. He's been helping his daddy on their farm since he was little." "What farm?" "Their family farm." "Where?" "Up north." "You keep saying that." "Up north where exactly?" Clara crossed her arms. "I don't see how that's any of your business." "It became my business when he started calling me Captain." Clara's expression didn't change, but Thomas saw something flicker behind her eyes. Maybe he just has good instincts about people. Nobody has instincts that good. Maybe you're not as good at hiding things as you think you are. Thomas stepped closer. Clara, I've known you for 8 years. You've never mentioned having a sister. I've got lots of family I don't talk about. And this sister just happened to send her boy to visit right now? Right now. After all these years of you never mentioning him, never talking about family, he just shows up. Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. Thomas, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen real careful. That boy needed a place to stay. I gave him one. That's all you need to know. Why? Because some children don't have anywhere else to go. Thomas felt something shift in the conversation. What happened to his parents? Nothing you need to worry about. Clara. Drop it, Thomas. They stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, Clara shook her head and walked back around the corner. Thomas followed, his mind racing with questions that had no good answers. The boy was still sitting in the dirt, still polishing boots with the same steady precision. He looked up as they approached. Everything settled? He asked. Clara nodded. Everything's fine. The boy smiled. Good. Thomas, you still want those boots cleaned? Thomas looked down at his scuffed work boots, then back at the boy's knowing eyes. Maybe some other time. Suit yourself, Captain. I'll be here tomorrow if you change your mind. Thomas turned and walked away, Clara's lie burning in his ears, and the boy's ancient smile etched behind his eyelids. The sheriff's patrol car kicked up a cloud of dust as it pulled to a stop outside Maddox's general store. Elena Vasquez stepped out, her uniform pressed sharp despite the early hour, her father's badge catching the morning light. She moved with the careful precision of someone who'd grown up in a house where every word mattered and every silence meant something worse. Thomas watched her approach from the shade of the store's awning. 8 years, and she still looked at him like he might pull a knife. Thomas. Elena. Heard there's been some trouble with a strange boy hanging around. Depends what you mean by trouble. Elena's hand rested on her belt, not far from her weapon. Mrs. Henderson called the station, says there's a child here asking questions he shouldn't be asking. Thomas glanced at the boy, who continued polishing boots as if he couldn't hear every word they were saying. He's just cleaning boots. That all? Far as I can tell. Elena studied Thomas's face. You look rattled. I look the same as always. No, you don't. The boy looked up from his work. Morning, Deputy Vasquez. Elena's hand moved closer to her weapon. How do you know my name? Says so on your badge. Says Vasquez. Doesn't say Elena. The boy smiled. Lucky guess. I don't believe in luck. Neither does your daddy. Elena's face went pale. What did you say? I said your daddy doesn't believe in luck either, believes in hard work and keeping order. Thomas watched Elena's jaw tighten. Kid, you need to be real careful about what comes out of your mouth. Why's that? Because I'm investigating complaints about you. The boy set down his polishing rag. What kind of complaints? The kind that say you know things you shouldn't know. I know lots of things. Such as? The boy tilted his head, studying Elena's face. I know your daddy keeps his war medals in the bottom drawer of his desk. The locked one, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and one he doesn't like to talk about. Elena took a step backward. How could you possibly know that? Same way I know he still wakes up screaming some nights. Stop talking. Same way I know why he really arrested Thomas's brother. Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. What? Elena spun toward him. Don't listen to him. The boy continued as if neither of them had spoken. Wasn't about the theft, was it, Deputy? Was about the questions David was asking. Shut up. Elena's voice cracked like a whip. Questions about where certain evidence went missing. Questions about who might be getting paid to look the other way. Thomas stepped closer to Elena. Is that true? Of course it's not true. The boy picked up another boot and began polishing. David found out about the money, didn't he? Found out who was taking payments to ignore certain shipments coming through town. Elena drew her weapon. I said shut up. Elena, what money? Thomas's voice was deadly quiet. There is no money. The boy looked directly at Elena. Tell him about the safe, Deputy. The one behind the old map of the county. Tell him how much cash your daddy keeps in there. You're lying. Am I? Elena's gun trembled in her hands. How could you know about any of this? I know lots of things about lots of people. Thomas grabbed Elena's wrist, forcing her to lower the weapon. Put the gun away. He knows things he can't know. Then we ask him how. Elena holstered her weapon but kept her hand on the grip. Fine. How? The boy continued his polishing. People talk. People always talk, especially when they think nobody's listening. Who talks? Dead people talk the loudest. Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. Dead people. Yes, ma'am. Dead people told you about my father's medals. Among other things. Thomas felt something cold crawl up his spine. What other things? The boy looked at him with those pale winter eyes. They told me about your brother, Captain, about what really happened the night he died in that cell. Elena's face went white. David died of a heart attack. Did he? The coroner confirmed it. The coroner your daddy plays poker with every Thursday night? Elena's breathing became shallow. You need to stop talking. Right now. The boy set down the boot he'd been working on. Your daddy didn't mean for David to die. He just meant to scare him quiet. Thomas's hands began to shake. What are you saying? I'm saying sometimes when you hit a man too hard, his heart gives out. Elena lunged forward, but Thomas caught her arm. Elena, don't. He's lying. He has to be lying. The boy looked up at her with something almost like sympathy. Your daddy's been carrying that guilt for 6 years now. It's why he drinks alone in his office after midnight. It's why he keeps David's arrest report in his desk drawer, right next to those medals. Stop it. It's why he hasn't been the same since that night. Elena broke free from Thomas's grip and took 2 steps toward the boy. If you know so much, then tell me this. If my father killed David Henley, why hasn't anyone else figured it out? Because dead men don't file complaints. There would have been evidence. There was evidence. Where? The boy smiled that ancient smile. Ask your daddy where he buried David's clothes, the ones with the blood on them. Elena's legs gave out. She sat down hard in the dirt, her face the color of old bone. This isn't possible. Thomas knelt beside her. Elena, if any of this is true. It's not true. It can't be true. The boy reached into his wooden box and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. He unfolded the fabric to reveal a tarnished badge. This belonged to anybody you know? Elena stared at the badge. It was old, scratched, with a number she recognized. Where did you get that? Found it buried behind the old well, about 6 feet down. That's David's badge. Thomas took the badge from the boy's hand. David was wearing this the night he was arrested. No, he wasn't, Elena whispered. The report says he wasn't wearing his badge when they brought him in. The boy folded the cloth back over the badge. Funny thing about reports, sometimes they don't tell the whole truth. Elena looked up at Thomas, tears starting in her eyes. If this is real, if any of this is real, then your father killed my brother. The boy stood up, brushing dust from his knees. Truth has a way of surfacing, doesn't it? No matter how deep you bury it. Elena struggled to her feet, her uniform wrinkled and stained with dirt. What do you want? I don't want nothing from you, deputy. Then why are you here? The boy picked up his wooden box and started walking away. I'm here because some stories need telling, and some debts need paying. He stopped and looked back over his shoulder. Your daddy's in his office right now, staring at that locked drawer. Been staring at it for 3 hours. Might be a good time for a visit. Then he disappeared around the corner of the building, leaving Thomas and Elena standing in the dust with the weight of 6 years' worth of lies settling between them like stones. Thomas drove to the cemetery with Elena's words echoing in his head. The gravel road crunched under his truck tires as he parked beside the rusted iron gates. He needed quiet. He needed space to think about what the boy had said, about David, about secrets buried 6 feet down. The cemetery stretched across 2 acres of rolling hill, dotted with headstones that ranged from elaborate marble monuments to simple wooden crosses. Some graves were well tended, with fresh flowers and carefully trimmed grass. Others had been forgotten, surrendered to weeds and weather. Thomas walked the familiar paths between the rows. He'd been coming here for 8 years, visiting David's grave every month like clockwork. But today felt different. Today, the silence felt heavy, pregnant with things unsaid. He found David's headstone near the back corner, a simple granite marker with his name, dates, and the word brother carved below. Thomas stood there for a long time, reading the inscription over and over, wondering how many lies were buried along with the body. Peaceful spot. Thomas spun around. The boy stood 20 feet away, his wooden box of boot polish supplies in his hands. Somehow, he'd approached without making a sound. "How did you find me here?" "Wasn't looking for you, Captain. Just came to pay respects." "To who?" The boy gestured at the graves surrounding them. "To the ones who never made it home." Thomas felt his chest tighten. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Means some folks die twice. Once in the ground, once in the forgetting." The boy walked deeper into the cemetery, moving between headstones with the confidence of someone who'd been here before. Thomas followed, his boots crushing dried leaves that had collected in the spaces between graves. "You come here often?" "Often enough." "Why?" The boy stopped beside a weathered headstone and knelt down. "To remember names." Thomas read the inscription over the boy's shoulder. "Marcus Webb, died age 23, beloved son." The dates showed he'd died 15 years ago, long before Thomas had moved to town. "You know him?" "No, sir." "But you did." Thomas's blood turned cold. "What?" The boy traced Marcus's name with his finger. "Marcus Webb, Specialist, 2nd Infantry, took shrapnel to the chest during the ambush at Creek Bend." Thomas stumbled backward. Creek Bend was classified. It had never appeared in any official reports, never been acknowledged by any government agency. The mission had been scrubbed from existence, the survivors sworn to silence. "How do you know that name?" "I know lots of names." The boy moved to another headstone. "James Morrison, Sergeant, same unit, bled out waiting for extraction that never came." Thomas's hands began to shake. "Stop it." "William Chen, Corporal, died trying to carry Marcus to safety." "Stop." The boy continued walking, touching each headstone as he passed. "Robert Silva, Anthony Martinez, David Park." Each name hit Thomas like a physical blow. These were men from his unit, soldiers who died under his command during operations that officially never happened, but they couldn't be buried here. They died overseas, in places that didn't exist on any map. "This isn't possible." The boy looked back at him. "What isn't possible, Captain? These men didn't die here. They died in the field." "Did they?" "I was there. I watched them die." "Where?" Thomas's throat closed up. "I can't tell you that." "Because it's classified?" "Because it never happened." The boy smiled that ancient smile. "But you remember it happening." "That's different." "Is it?" Thomas approached the headstone marked David Park. The dates were wrong. David had died in 2018, not 2015. And he'd died in a jungle halfway around the world, not in this quiet cemetery. "These graves are fake." "Are they?" "The dates are wrong. The locations are wrong." "Maybe your memory's wrong." Thomas knelt beside David Park's grave and brushed dirt away from the base of the headstone. The stone was weathered, aged by years of rain and snow. It looked genuine. "I don't understand." The boy sat down beside him. "Sometimes when men die far from home, pieces of them travel back anyway." "That's not how death works." "Isn't it?" Thomas stared at the carved name. David Park had been 19 years old, barely old enough to shave. He'd joined Thomas's unit 3 weeks before the mission that killed him. He'd died calling for his mother. "How do you know these names?" "They told me." "Told you what?" "Their stories, their regrets, the things they never got to say." Thomas looked around at the other headstones, at names he recognized from the worst night of his life. "Who else is here?" The boy pointed to a row of graves near the back fence. "Miguel Santos, Kevin O'Brien, and the one you think about most." Thomas followed the boy's gaze to a headstone that stood apart from the others. The name carved into the granite made his legs give out. "No." "Yes, sir." "That's not possible." "Why not?" Thomas crawled toward the headstone on his hands and knees. The name carved into the stone was his own. Thomas Henley, died age 26, beloved son and brother. "I'm not dead." "Aren't you?" Thomas touched the cold granite. The carving was deep, weathered, old. "This says I died 10 years ago. Maybe you did." "I'm sitting right here." "Part of you is." Thomas looked up at the boy with wild eyes. "What happened to the rest of me?" The boy's expression grew sad. "You left it in that jungle, Captain. Left it with all the men who died following your orders." "That's not true, isn't it?" Thomas stood up slowly, his legs trembling. If I'm dead, then what am I? You're what's left, the part that couldn't let go. Let go of what? The guilt, the weight of all those names. The boy stood and picked up his wooden box. That's why you came here, Captain, not for answers, for permission. Permission for what? To join them. Thomas stared at his own headstone, at the dates that marked a life that ended the night his unit was destroyed. How long have I been dead? Does it matter? It matters to me. The boy walked toward the cemetery gate. Time works different for the dead, Captain. Sometimes a day feels like 10 years. Sometimes 10 years feels like a day. Thomas followed him. Where are you going? Got boots to clean. Wait, the boy stopped. Yes, sir. If I'm dead, if all of this is just some kind of afterlife, then what are you? The boy turned back, and for the first time, Thomas saw something like pity in those pale eyes. I'm the one who helps the dead remember they're dead, Captain. And I'm the one who helps them decide whether they want to stay that way. Then he walked through the cemetery gates and disappeared into the morning light, leaving Thomas alone among the graves of men who died twice. Elena found Clara in the back room of the general store, stacking cans of peaches with methodical precision. Her hands moved without trembling, but Elena caught the slight shake in her shoulders, the way she avoided eye contact when the door chimed open. We need to talk. Clara didn't look up from her work. Store's open for business if you need something. I need the truth about that boy. I already told you the truth. Elena stepped closer, her badge catching the afternoon light streaming through the dusty window. No, you told me a story. There's a difference. Clara finally turned around. Her face was pale, drawn tight with the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying secrets too heavy for one person. What do you want me to say? Elena, I want you to tell me how a 12-year-old boy knows details about my father's military service that aren't in any public record. Maybe he's smart. Nobody's that smart. Clara wiped her hands on her apron, buying time. Children hear things. They repeat what they hear. Who would tell him about my father's Bronze Star? I don't know. What about the Purple Heart? I don't know. Elena moved closer. What about the third medal, the one my father keeps locked away and never talks about? Clara's face went white. I don't know what you're talking about. The boy knew about it. Knew exactly where my father keeps it. That's impossible. Is it? Clara turned back to her cans, but her hands were shaking now. I told you, he's my nephew. Stop lying to me, Clara. I'm not lying. Elena grabbed Clara's wrist, forcing her to stop stacking. That boy is not your nephew. You don't have a sister. You don't have any family left in this county or any other. Clara pulled her hand free. You don't know everything about me. I know enough. I know you've lived in this town for 40 years. I know your husband died in the war. I know you've been alone ever since. So, where did that boy come from? Clara's composure finally cracked. She sank onto a wooden crate, her face crumpling like old paper. I can't tell you. Why not? Because you won't believe me. Elena knelt beside her. Try me. Clara stared at her hands for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. He showed up 3 months ago. During the storm. Clara nodded. Worst storm we'd had in years. Thunder shaking the windows, rain coming down sideways. I was closing up the store when I heard knocking. On the door. Soft knocking. Like a child would make. Elena waited, letting Clara find her words. I opened the door, and there he was, soaked to the bone, shivering, but not crying. Most children would be crying. What did he say? He said he was looking for somewhere warm to wait out the storm. That's all? Clara shook her head. He looked right at me and said my name. Said, Good evening, Mrs. Maddox. I'm sorry for your loss. Elena felt something cold crawl up her spine. What loss? That's what I asked him. I said, What loss, child? And he pointed to the picture on the counter. What picture? The one of my husband in his uniform. The one I keep by the register. Elena had seen that picture 100 times. A young man in military dress, smiling at the camera with the confidence of someone who didn't know he wouldn't make it home. What did the boy say about your husband? He said Robert was a good soldier, said he died trying to save his squad. Elena's blood ran cold. How could he know that? That's just it. He knew details I'd never told anyone. He knew Robert's unit number. He knew the name of the battle where Robert died. He knew Robert had been carrying letters from his squad mates to their families. Letters? Letters Robert never got to deliver because he died first. Clara reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small bundle of yellowed envelopes tied with string. The boy gave me these. Said Robert wanted me to have them. Elena stared at the letters. Where did he get them? I don't know. Clara, those letters would have been lost with your husband's body. I know. They should have been buried overseas. I know. Elena took the bundle with trembling hands. The envelopes were old, stained, but the writing was clear. Different handwriting on each envelope, different names in the return addresses, all addressed to families back home. Have you read them? Some of them. What do they say? Clara's voice broke. Last words, love letters, things these boys wanted their families to know before they died. Elena felt tears starting in her eyes. This is impossible. I know. Dead men don't deliver mail. I know. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the letters heavy between them. Why did you take him in? Elena finally asked. Clara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Because he reminded me of someone. Who? That's the thing. I can't remember who. What do you mean? I mean, I look at that boy and I see someone I know I should remember, but the memory won't come. It's like trying to remember a dream after you wake up. Elena studied Clara's face. Someone from your past? Maybe. Or maybe someone I never met but was supposed to. That doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense. Elena stood up slowly. Clara, I need you to think. Really think. Who does he remind you of? Clara closed her eyes, concentrating. It's like looking at a photograph where the face is blurred. I know there's someone there, but I can't make out the features. Is it someone from the war? Someone who served with your husband? I don't know. Someone from this town? I don't know. Elena helped Clara to her feet. We need to find out who that boy really is. Clara looked at the bundle of letters in Elena's hands. What if we don't like what we find? What do you mean? What if the truth is worse than the mystery? Elena considered this for a moment. Sometimes the truth is the only thing that can set us free. Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. And sometimes the truth is the thing that buries us. Thomas drove home from the cemetery with his hands gripping the steering wheel tight enough to leave marks. The farmhouse sat at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by fields that had been fallow for 3 years. He'd stopped trying to work the land after the nightmares got too bad to function. The boy was sitting on his front porch steps when he pulled into the driveway. Thomas cut the engine and sat in the truck for a full minute, staring at the child who somehow knew things that were impossible to know. Finally, he opened the door and stepped out. How did you get here? Walked. It's 8 miles from town. I've got good legs. Thomas climbed the porch steps, fishing his keys from his pocket. What do you want? To finish our conversation. We weren't having a conversation. Sure we were, Captain. Just got interrupted is all. Thomas unlocked the front door, but didn't invite the boy inside. You need to go home. Don't have a home. Clara said you were staying with her. Clara says lots of things. Thomas pushed the door open and stepped into the dim hallway. The house smelled like dust and old grief, like a place where someone had given up trying to live. You coming in or not? The boy called from the porch. I didn't invite you in. Didn't uninvite me either. Thomas left the door open and walked to the kitchen. The boy followed, his footsteps soft on the worn wooden floors. Nice place. Quiet. I like quiet. Course you do. Quiet means you can't hear them. Thomas opened the refrigerator and pulled out a beer. Can't hear who? The ones calling your name. Thomas popped the beer open and took a long pull. I don't know what you're talking about. The boy climbed onto one of the kitchen chairs, his feet dangling several inches from the floor. Marcus Webb calls the loudest. Then James Morrison. Then William Chen. Thomas's hand tightened on the beer bottle. Stop saying those names. Why? Because they're dead. So? So dead men don't call anyone. The boy tilted his head. You sure about that, Captain? Thomas drained half the beer in one gulp. They died 10 years ago. Overseas. In a place that doesn't exist on any official map. Tell me about that place. No. Why not? Because it's classified. Who you gonna tell? I'm just a boy who cleans boots. Thomas set the empty bottle on the counter with more force than necessary. "You're something else entirely." "Maybe. But I'm still listening." Thomas stared out the kitchen window at the empty fields. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky the color of old blood. "We were supposed to be rescuing hostages, but you weren't." "No." "What were you really doing?" Thomas closed his eyes. "Following orders that didn't make sense." "What kind of orders?" "The kind that get good men killed." The boy waited, patient as stone. Intelligence said there were American civilians being held in a compound near Creek Bend. Journalists, aid workers, people who'd been grabbed during a supply run. "How many hostages?" 12. "How many of you?" 26 men in my unit. Thomas opened another beer, his hands shaking slightly. "We went in at dawn, full tactical assault, breached the compound in under 3 minutes. What did you find?" "Nothing." "No hostages?" "No hostages, no guards, no evidence anyone had ever been there." The boy's pale eyes never left Thomas's face. "But you stayed anyway." "We had secondary orders. Search and destroy any weapons caches we found." "Did you find any?" "We found something." Thomas took another pull of beer. Back room of the compound. Crates of documents, maps, communication equipment, intelligence materials. "That's what we thought." But they weren't. Thomas shook his head. They were bait. "For who?" "For us." The boy leaned forward in his chair. "Someone wanted you there. Someone wanted us dead." Thomas walked to the window, staring out at the darkening fields. "The ambush started 15 minutes after we breached the compound. Sniper fire from 3 directions. Mortars. Heavy machine guns." "How many made it out?" 4. "Out of 26. Out of 26. The boy climbed down from his chair and walked to Thomas's side. "You were the ranking officer." "I was. So it was your call to go in." Thomas's voice dropped to a whisper. "It was my call. And your call to stay when you should have left." "Yes." "And your call that got 22 good men killed." Thomas's legs gave out. He slid down the kitchen wall and sat on the floor, his beer forgotten. "Yes." The boy sat down beside him. "What happened to their dog tags?" Thomas looked at the child with haunted eyes. "How do you know about the dog tags?" "I know about lots of things, Captain. I carried them out. All of them. Every single one." "What did you do with them?" Thomas pointed toward the cellar door. "I buried them." "Where?" "Downstairs." The boy stood up and walked to the cellar door. "Show me." "No." "Why not?" "Because some things should stay buried." The boy turned the handle and pulled the door open. "Some things. Not all things." Thomas struggled to his feet. "Don't go down there." "Why not?" "Because that's where I keep the things I can't live with." The boy started down the wooden steps into the darkness. "That's exactly why I need to see them." Thomas followed, flicking on the bare bulb that hung from the ceiling. The cellar was small, cramped, filled with boxes and old furniture covered in dust sheets. In the far corner, a section of the concrete floor looked newer than the rest. The boy walked directly to that spot and knelt down. "Here." "How did you know?" "Same way I know you come down here every night." "I don't come down here every night." "You come down here every night for 10 years, Captain. You sit in that chair and you stare at this spot, and you count their names." Thomas looked at the old wooden chair positioned facing the patch of newer concrete. He'd forgotten he'd put it there. Or maybe he'd blocked it out. "Marcus Webb," the boy said softly. "James Morrison, William Chen, Robert Silva, Anthony Martinez, David Park." He continued reciting names, 22 in total, each one hitting Thomas like a physical blow. "Stop!" "Miguel Santos, Kevin O'Brien, Daniel Kim." "Please stop." "They're not angry at you, Captain." Thomas fell to his knees beside the boy. "Yes, they are." "No, sir, they're not. I led them into a trap." "You followed orders." "I should have known better." "Should have known what?" "That something was wrong. That the intelligence was bad. That we were walking into an ambush." The boy placed his small hand on Thomas's shoulder. "You were a soldier, Captain. Soldiers follow orders. Good soldiers question orders that don't make sense." "Did you question them?" Thomas closed his eyes. "I started to, but then command reminded me what happened to officers who questioned orders too much." "What happened to them?" "They got transferred, reassigned. Their careers ended." So you chose your career over your men. The words hung in the air like poison. Thomas had never said it out loud before, never let himself think it in such clear terms. But hearing it spoken made something break inside his chest. Yes. And that's why you carry their tags. Yes. And that's why you built this shrine. Thomas looked around the cellar with new eyes. Because that's what it was. A shrine to his guilt. A place where he could worship his failures in private. I was supposed to protect them. You were supposed to follow orders. Those are the same thing. The boy shook his head. No, sir, they're not. And that's the problem. Thomas stared at the patch of concrete that held 22 sets of dog tags. 22 names. 22 families who'd been told their sons died heroes, when the truth was they died because their captain was a coward. What am I supposed to do with this? The boy stood up and brushed dust from his knees. That's up to you, Captain, but keeping them buried down here isn't helping anybody. It's helping me. Is it? Thomas considered this. 10 years of nightly visits to a basement shrine. 10 years of drinking alone and avoiding sleep and jumping at every unexpected sound. No. Then maybe it's time to dig them up. Elena sat in her father's office after midnight. The only light coming from the desk lamp and the glow of the computer screen. Sheriff Vasquez had gone home hours ago, leaving behind the smell of whiskey and the weight of secrets that grew heavier each day. She'd waited until the station was empty before breaking into his locked filing cabinet. The military records were buried beneath years of case files and administrative paperwork. Elena pulled folder after folder, searching for anything connected to Thomas Henley or his brother David. Most of the files contained routine information, traffic citations, property disputes, domestic disturbances. Normal small-town problems with normal small-town solutions. Then she found the folder marked Henley Thomas Service Record. Elena opened the file with trembling hands. Inside were photocopied documents, military correspondence, and a single photograph of Thomas in dress uniform. He looked younger, cleaner, like someone who still believed in the mission. The official records told a strange story. According to the paperwork, Thomas Henley had served as a captain in the 2nd Infantry Division. His unit had been deployed overseas for special operations. But there were gaps in the timeline, sections redacted in black ink. Entire missions that existed only as classified reference numbers. The last entry made Elena's blood run cold. Unit status missing in action. Date, March 15, 2014. Last known location classified. Personnel unaccounted for 26 soldiers, including commanding officer Captain Thomas Henley. Elena read the entry 3 times. Thomas wasn't dead according to these records. He was missing, along with his entire unit. But Thomas was very clearly alive, living 8 miles outside of town, drinking beer in his kitchen, and talking to strange boys who knew impossible things. She reached for the phone and dialed the military records office. It rang 4 times before a tired voice answered. Records Division, Sergeant Martinez speaking. This is Deputy Elena Vasquez, badge number 4471. I need information about a missing unit from 2014. Ma'am, I'll need to verify your authority to access classified information. I'm investigating a missing persons case that may be connected to military personnel. There was a long pause. Can you provide the unit designation? Elena read the reference number from Thomas's file. Another pause, longer this time. Ma'am, that unit is classified above my clearance level. I'll need to transfer you to my supervisor. How long will that take? He'll be in tomorrow morning at 800. Elena hung up and stared at the records spread across her father's desk. 26 soldiers missing. No confirmation of death. No confirmation of survival. Just gone. Erased from existence like they'd never been deployed at all. She picked up the phone again and dialed information. I need the number for the Department of Veterans Affairs Missing Personnel Division. One moment, please. The VA office was closed, but Elena left a detailed message explaining her investigation. Then she started making calls to families. The records included next-of-kin information for each missing soldier. Most of the phone numbers were disconnected or had been changed. But some families still lived at the same addresses, still waited by the same phones, hoping for news that never came. The first family she reached was Marcus Webb's mother in Oklahoma. Mrs. Webb, this is Deputy Elena Vasquez. I'm calling about your son Marcus. The woman's sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone. Has there been news? I'm investigating a case that might be connected to his unit. Can you tell me if anyone has contacted you recently about Marcus? What kind of someone? Maybe a child, a boy who knew details about your son's service. Mrs. Webb was quiet for so long, Elena thought the call had been disconnected. Mrs. Webb, there was a boy, about 3 weeks ago. Elena grabbed a pen. Can you describe him? Young, maybe 12 or 13. Pale eyes. He came to my door during a rainstorm. Elena felt her pulse quicken. What did he say? He said he had a message from Marcus. Said Marcus wanted me to know he'd been thinking about me when he died. Did he give you anything? A letter. In Marcus's handwriting. Elena's hand tightened on the phone. What did the letter say? Things only Marcus would know. Memories from when he was little. Promises he'd made before he deployed. Where is that letter now? I burned it. Why? Because it scared me. Dead boys don't write letters, Deputy. Elena made similar calls to 6 other families. Each conversation followed the same pattern. A mysterious boy appearing during storms. Letters from missing sons. Details that only the dead soldiers would know. And each time, the families had destroyed the evidence because it frightened them too much to keep. She found a pattern in the dates. The boy had appeared in Oklahoma 3 weeks ago. Before that, he'd been in Texas. Before that, New Mexico. Always moving east, always seeking out families of missing soldiers from Thomas's unit. Elena pulled up a map on her computer and marked each location. The pattern was clear. The boy was following a specific route, visiting specific families, delivering specific messages. But why? And how was he getting information that military records couldn't provide? She dialed another number, this one for a small police department in New Mexico. Roswell Police. Officer Garcia speaking. This is Deputy Elena Vasquez, badge 4471. I'm investigating reports of a child who may have passed through your jurisdiction about 6 weeks ago. What kind of child? 12 or 13 years old, pale eyes, carries boot polishing supplies, may have been asking questions about military families. Garcia was quiet for a moment. Yeah, I remember him. Strange kid. Showed up during that big storm we had in April. Did he cause any trouble? Opposite. Helped Mrs. Santos clean out her garage. Found some old letters from her boy who went missing overseas. Did you investigate? Nothing to investigate. Kid disappeared after the storm passed. Mrs. Santos said he helped her find peace with her son's death. Elena thanked Garcia and hung up. She made 3 more calls to police departments along the boy's route. Each time, the story was the same. A mysterious child appearing during storms, helping families of missing soldiers, then disappearing without explanation. She leaned back in her father's chair and tried to make sense of what she'd learned. 26 soldiers listed as missing, a boy who somehow knew their stories, families receiving messages from sons who were officially neither dead nor alive. Elena opened her father's desk drawer and pulled out a bottle of bourbon. She poured 2 fingers into a coffee mug and drank it straight. The whiskey burned, but it helped her think. The boy wasn't random. He wasn't lost or abandoned. He was on a mission following a specific plan, delivering specific messages to specific people. But he wasn't working alone. Someone was giving him information, someone with access to classified military records and personal details about dead soldiers. Elena looked at the photograph of Thomas in his dress uniform, young, confident, ready to lead men into battle. She compared it to the broken man she'd seen in the cemetery, haunted by ghosts and guilt. What if Thomas wasn't the only survivor? What if some of his unit had made it out alive but couldn't come home? What if they were trapped in some kind of bureaucratic limbo, officially missing but unofficially abandoned? Elena picked up the phone to call Thomas, then stopped. If her theory was correct, if there were other survivors who couldn't come home, then Thomas might be in more danger than he realized. Someone was using the boy to deliver messages. But messages to what end? She locked the files back in her father's cabinet and headed for the door. She needed to find Thomas before the boy delivered whatever message he'd been sent to deliver, because Elena had a feeling that some messages weren't meant to bring peace. Some messages were meant to bring judgment. Elena found Thomas sitting on his front porch at dawn, a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. The boy was nowhere to be seen, but his wooden box of boot polish sat on the porch steps like he'd just stepped away for a moment. "We need to talk." Thomas looked up with hollow eyes. "About what?" "About your unit. About the 26 soldiers listed as missing in action." Thomas set down his coffee cup. "You've been digging." "It's my job to dig." "Not in classified files." Elena climbed the porch steps and sat beside him. "Your entire unit disappeared 10 years ago. Officially, you're all still missing. Officially, we never existed. But you're here." "Part of me is." Elena studied his face. "What happened to the others?" "They died." "You sure about that?" Thomas turned to look at her. "I watched them die, Elena. I counted the bodies." "Then why are you listed as missing instead of dead?" "Because dead soldiers get investigations. Missing soldiers get forgotten." The boy emerged from around the side of the house, carrying a bucket of water and a clean rag. He walked up the porch steps like he belonged there, like he'd been living in this house for years instead of hours. "Morning, Deputy Vasquez." Elena stood up, her hand moving instinctively toward her weapon. "We need answers." "I figured you might." Thomas gestured toward the boy. "Elena, meet our resident expert on things that shouldn't be possible." The boy set down his bucket and looked directly at Elena. "You want to know why I'm here? That's a start. I'm here because Thomas needs to stop punishing himself for something that wasn't his fault." Elena glanced at Thomas. "What's he talking about?" The boy answered before Thomas could speak. "He's been carrying 22 sets of dog tags for 10 years, keeping them buried in his cellar like some kind of shrine." "Is that true?" Thomas nodded. "It's true." "Why?" "Because I got them killed." The boy shook his head. "No, sir, you didn't. I followed orders that didn't make sense." "You followed orders. Period." Elena moved closer. "What orders?" Thomas looked at the boy. "How much does she need to know?" "All of it." Thomas took a deep breath. "We were sent to rescue hostages that didn't exist. Led into an ambush that killed 22 good men." "Who sent you?" "Command." "Which command?" "The kind that doesn't leave paper trails." Elena felt pieces clicking into place. "Someone wanted your unit dead." "Someone wanted us quiet." The boy picked up his polishing rag and began cleaning an already spotless boot. Thomas and his men stumbled onto something they weren't supposed to see. "What kind of something?" Thomas answered. "Arms dealing. High-ranking officers selling weapons to insurgent groups." "You had evidence." "We had names, dates, financial records." Elena sat back down. "So, they sent you on a suicide mission. They sent us to die with honor instead of living with secrets." The boy looked up from his work. "Except Thomas didn't die. 4 of us made it out." "What happened to the other 3? Thomas's voice dropped to a whisper. "Car accident 2 weeks after we got back. All 3 of them." Elena felt cold dread settling in her stomach. "That's not a coincidence." "No, it's not." The boy continued polishing. "Thomas has been hiding ever since, drinking himself to death real slow, trying to join his men the coward's way." "I'm not a coward." "Aren't you?" Thomas stood up abruptly. "I've had enough of your riddles, boy. Tell us who you really are." The boy set down his boot and looked up with those pale winter eyes. "I'm exactly who I said I was, a boy who cleans boots." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer that matters." Elena leaned forward. "How do you know about Thomas's unit?" "Families talk." "What families?" "Families of dead soldiers." The boy reached into his wooden box and pulled out a stack of letters tied with string. "Marcus Webb's mother told me about the night before he deployed, how scared he was. How he made her promise to take care of his dog if something happened to him." Elena recognized the letters from Clara's store. "Where did you get those?" "James Morrison's father gave me his son's last letter home, the one where James wrote about his commanding officer, how much the men respected Captain Henley." Thomas stared at the letters. "Those men died because of me." "No, sir. They died because of orders you all believed in." The boy untied the string and spread the letters on the porch steps. "William Chen's sister told me about the phone call she got 3 days before the ambush." How William said his captain was asking too many questions about their mission parameters. I was trying to protect them. I know that. Then why are you here? The boy looked directly into Thomas's eyes. Because their families want you to know something. What? That they don't blame you. Thomas felt something break loose in his chest. Yes, they do. No, sir, they don't. They should. Maybe, but they don't. Elena watched tears start in Thomas's eyes. How do you know what the families think? The boy gathered up the letters. Because I've talked to all of them. Every family of every soldier who died under Thomas's command. How did you find them? I've been looking for 3 years. Thomas wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Why? Because my grandfather was William Chen. Elena felt the world tilt slightly. Your grandfather? William Chen died saving 2 of his squad mates during the ambush. Died a hero, not a victim. Thomas stared at the boy with new understanding. You're William's grandson. Yes, sir. But William was Chinese-American. You're half white, half Chinese. My grandmother remarried after the war. Elena looked between them. So this isn't supernatural. This is personal. The boy nodded. My family has been carrying stories about that unit for 10 years. Stories about brave men who died following orders they believed in. Why didn't you just tell me that from the beginning? Would you have listened? Thomas considered this. Probably not. Dead heroes make better teachers than live grandsons. Elena stood up slowly. So, you've been traveling around the country, visiting families, collecting stories, and delivering messages. What kind of messages? The boy looked at Thomas. Messages of forgiveness. Thomas felt his legs give out. He sat down hard on the porch steps, his face in his hands. I don't deserve forgiveness. Maybe not, but you have it anyway. How can you be sure? The boy smiled that ancient smile. Because I asked them, every family, every parent and sibling and spouse, and they all said the same thing. What? That their boys died serving under a good captain who tried his best in an impossible situation. Thomas looked up through his tears, even after everything that happened. Especially after everything that happened. The boy picked up his wooden box and stood to leave. You can keep carrying their dog tags, Captain. Or you can start living in a way that honors their sacrifice. How do I do that? By stopping the people who killed them. Elena straightened. You know who gave the orders. The boy smiled. I know lots of things, Deputy, and I think it's time some of those things came to light. Thomas stood on his porch for a long moment, staring at the boy who claimed to be William Chen's grandson. The morning sun was climbing higher, burning off the mist that clung to the empty fields. Elena waited beside him, her deputy's badge catching the light. Clara had arrived sometime during their conversation. Drawn by whatever force seemed to pull people toward this strange child. You want me to dig up those dog tags. I want you to stop burying them. Thomas looked at Elena. You sure you want to see this? I've seen worse. Have you? Clara stepped forward. Thomas, what's down in that cellar? 22 reasons why I can't sleep at night. The boy picked up his wooden box. Time to bring them up into the light, Captain. Thomas walked to his front door, then stopped. Once I do this, there's no going back. There was never any going back. Elena followed Thomas into the house. Clara came next, then the boy. They moved through the dim hallway like mourners approaching a grave. Thomas opened the cellar door and flicked on the bare bulb. The wooden steps creaked under their weight as they descended into the basement. The air smelled like dust and old grief. In the corner, the patch of newer concrete looked like a scar in the floor. Thomas knelt beside the spot and began digging with his bare hands. The concrete was only an inch thick, poured over a metal box that he'd buried 10 years ago. His fingernails split and bled as he clawed at the concrete, but he didn't stop. Elena knelt beside him. Let me help. No. Thomas, this is something I have to do myself. The boy sat on the wooden chair that faced the burial spot. Take your time, Captain. Thomas finally broke through the concrete and pulled out a small metal ammunition box. His hands shook as he lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were 22 sets of dog tags. Each set contained 2 tags connected by a chain. Names, blood types, serial numbers, religious preferences. The final accounting of 22 lives cut short. How long since you opened that box? 10 years. How long since you said their names? 10 years. The boy leaned forward in his chair. Time to introduce us. Thomas lifted out the first set of dog tags. The metal was cold against his fingers, tarnished but still readable. Marcus Webb, blood type O negative, Methodist. Marcus was afraid of spiders. The boy said quietly. Used to make his squad mates check his sleeping bag every night. Thomas looked up in surprise. How could you know that? His mother told me. She said he wrote about it in his letters home. Thomas picked up the next set. James Morrison, blood type A positive, Catholic. James played guitar, wrote songs about missing his girlfriend back home. You talked to his girlfriend. I talked to his wife. They got married a week before he deployed. Clara wiped tears from her eyes. Oh, that poor woman. Thomas continued. William Chen, blood type B positive, no religious preference. The boy's voice grew softer. My grandfather, he was going to study engineering when he got back. Wanted to build bridges. He was a good soldier. He was a good man. Thomas picked up another set of tags. Robert Silva, blood type AB negative, Baptist. Robert had twin daughters, 5 years old when he died. They're 15 now. Honor students. Elena moved closer. You've met his family. I've met all their families. Thomas's voice began to crack. Anthony Martinez, blood type O positive, Catholic. Anthony's mother still sets a place for him at Sunday dinner every week for 10 years. David Park, blood type A negative, Buddhist. David's father planted a garden in his memory, grows vegetables, and gives them to anyone who needs food. Thomas picked up the next set of tags, but his hands were shaking too badly to read them. Elena gently took the tags from his fingers. Miguel Santos, blood type O positive, Catholic. The boy nodded. Miguel's brother named his son after him. Little Miguel is 8 years old now, wants to be a soldier when he grows up. Clara spoke up. These families are still grieving. Yes, ma'am, they are, but they're also still living. Thomas took back the dog tags and continued reading. Kevin O'Brien, blood type B negative, Presbyterian. Kevin's parents started a scholarship fund, sends kids from his hometown to college every year. Daniel Kim, blood type A positive, Methodist. Daniel's sister became a doctor, says she wanted to save lives the way her brother couldn't be saved. Thomas read through all 22 names, his voice growing stronger with each one. The boy responded to every name with a story, a memory, a detail about the families left behind. By the time Thomas finished, his face was wet with tears. They're all still out there, still waiting. Some of them, others have found peace. How? By choosing to remember the living instead of just mourning the dead. Thomas looked at the dog tags spread across the cellar floor. What am I supposed to do with these? What do you think you should do? I don't know anymore. Elena knelt beside him. Maybe that's the point. What? Maybe you're not supposed to know. Maybe you're supposed to ask. Thomas looked up at her. Ask who? Ask the families. Ask what they want. The boy stood up from his chair. Some of them want the tags returned. Some of them want to know how their boys died. Some of them just want to know that someone remembers. Clara wiped her eyes. And some of them want justice. The boy smiled. Yes, ma'am. Some of them want justice most of all. Thomas gathered the dog tags into his hands. 22 sets of cold metal that had been burning holes in his soul for a decade. What kind of justice? The kind that makes sure what happened to your unit never happens to anyone else. Elena stood up. You're talking about going after the people who gave the orders. I'm talking about finishing what your unit started. Thomas looked at each of them in turn. Elena with her badge and her father's secrets. Clara with her store full of memories and her mysterious letters. The boy with his pale eyes and his impossible knowledge. You think I can do that? The boy picked up his wooden box. I think you're the only one who can, Captain. Why? Because you're the only one left who knows the truth. Thomas closed his eyes and felt something shift inside his chest. 10 years of guilt and grief and self-destruction. 10 years of hiding from a truth that refused to stay buried. What happens if I fail? Then you fail trying to do the right thing instead of succeeding at doing nothing. Thomas opened his eyes and looked at the dog tags in his hands. 22 names, 22 families, 22 reasons to stop hiding. When do we start? The boy smiled. We already have, Captain. We already have. Thomas sat at his kitchen table with the dog tags spread before him like a map of his past. The morning light streamed through windows he'd kept covered for years, illuminating 22 sets of tarnished metal that no longer felt like chains around his neck. Elena and Clara flanked him, watching as he picked up his phone for the first time in a decade with the intention of making peace instead of hiding from it. You sure about this? No. But I'm doing it anyway. Thomas dialed the first number the boy had given him, Marcus Webb's mother in Oklahoma. The phone rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered, cautious and worn thin by years of waiting. Mrs. Webb, this is Captain Thomas Henley. I served with your son Marcus. The silence on the other end stretched so long Thomas thought she'd hung up. Then he heard a sharp intake of breath. Captain Henley, we thought you were dead. Part of me was. Are you calling with news about Marcus? Thomas looked down at Marcus's dog tags. I'm calling to tell you about the man your son became, and to ask your forgiveness for the orders I followed. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. Mrs. Webb cried. Thomas cried. By the end, she was telling him about the scholarship fund she'd started in Marcus's name and asking if he'd speak at their next memorial service. Elena watched Thomas dial the second number. How do you feel? Terrified. Good. That means it matters. The boy appeared in the kitchen doorway, his wooden box in his hands. He moved quietly, like he didn't want to interrupt something sacred. Making progress, Captain? Trying to. That's all anyone can do. Thomas looked up from James Morrison's number. You're leaving. My work here is finished. What about Elena's father? What about the corruption you mentioned? The boy glanced at Elena. That's not my job anymore. Elena straightened. Whose job is it? Yours. Thomas set down the phone. What about justice for my unit? Justice starts with truth, Captain. You're telling the truth now. The rest will follow. Clara wiped her hands on her apron. Will we see you again? The boy smiled. Probably not, ma'am. Once folks start healing, they don't need me anymore. But you'll be all right. I'll be what I've always been. Elena studied the boy's face. Which is what exactly? Someone who helps people remember that the dead don't want the living to stop living. Thomas stood up from the table. I still don't understand how you knew all those things. Does it matter? It matters to me. The boy set his wooden box on the counter. Sometimes when people carry stories long enough, the stories start carrying themselves. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. Thomas picked up the boy's wooden box and opened it. Inside were the familiar tools of his trade, brushes, rags, tins of polish. But underneath, wrapped in cloth, was something else. A photograph of William Chen in his dress uniform, smiling at the camera with the confidence of youth. This is your grandfather. Yes, sir. He looks like you. So my grandmother always said. Thomas studied the photograph. William had the same pale eyes, the same knowing smile. But there was something else. Something that made Thomas's chest tighten with recognition. How old are you, really? Old enough to do what needs doing. That's not what I asked. The boy looked out of the kitchen window at the empty fields. Age works different for some folks, Captain. Elena moved closer. What does that mean? Means some people are born old, and some people never grow up, and some people exist in the spaces between. Clara frowned. Which are you? The boy picked up his photograph of William Chen. I'm whatever I need to be. Thomas closed the wooden box and held it out to the boy. Take this with you. No, sir. Why not? Because you're going to need it. For what? For remembering that some things can be cleaned up even when they seem permanently stained. Elena watched the boy walk toward the kitchen door. Where will you go? Where I'm needed. How will you know where that is? Same way I knew to come here. The boy stopped at the door and looked back at Thomas. Captain, when you contact those families, there's something you should know. What? They've been waiting for your call, some of them for 10 years. How could they know I was alive? Because dead men don't carry guilt, sir. Only the living do that. Thomas felt tears starting in his eyes again. Will this get easier? Will what get easier? Living with what happened. The boy considered this. No, sir, I don't think it will. But it'll get different. How? You'll stop living for the dead and start living for the living, including yourself. The boy opened the kitchen door and stepped onto the back porch. Morning mist clung to the fields, thick and white as cotton. Elena followed him outside with Thomas and Clara close behind. Wait, the boy turned back. Yes, ma'am. I need to know something. What's that? Are you real? The boy's smile was sad and ancient and somehow familiar. Real as anything else that matters, deputy. He walked into the mist with his shoulders straight and his head high. Elena watched him go, trying to hold on to the details of his face, the sound of his voice, the way he moved through the world like he belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. But already, the memories were starting to fade. By the time the mist swallowed him completely, Elena could barely remember what color his eyes had been. Thomas stood on the porch for a long time, staring at the place where the boy had disappeared. Finally, he turned and walked back into the house. The wooden box sat on the kitchen counter where the boy had left it. Thomas opened it and pulled out a tin of black boot polish. The label was worn, the metal dented from use. He unscrewed the lid and breathed in the smell of wax and leather and honest work. Clara touched his shoulder. You all right? I will be. How can you be sure? Thomas looked at the dog tag still spread across his kitchen table, then at the phone that would connect him to 21 more conversations he'd been avoiding for a decade. Because I've got work to do. He picked up the phone and dialed the next number. James Morrison's widow answered on the second ring, her voice hopeful and heartbroken and strong. Thomas took a deep breath and began the long process of learning how to live with the weight of truth instead of the weight of secrets. Outside, the morning mist lifted from the fields, revealing the world clean and bright and full of possibility.